Alright folks, here's a straight-up, data-backed rundown of recent left-wing violent extremism over the last, 10 years or so. We'll dive into what it looks like and point you to some credible sources you can check out for more info. So, what exactly counts as left-wing violent extremism, or LWVE for short? Well, US agencies and research groups use a few overlapping labels for this slice of domestic extremism. You've got the anarchist or anti-authority violent extremists, sometimes showing up at protests, and their tactics can include things like arson, assaults, and attacks on government buildings. Then there are the environmental and animal rights violent extremists, historically known for arson and sabotage, though there have been fewer incidents in recent years compared to the peak in the 90s and early 2000s. And let's not forget abortion-related violent extremism, which the Department of Homeland Security tracks on both sides. On the left, that has included fire bombings and vandalism of pro-life offices and pregnancy centers, especially after the 2022 Dobbs leak. Now, looking at the big picture, multiple data sets from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the Anti-Defamation League find that far-right violence is far more deadly and frequent overall. But left-wing violence does occur, usually taking the form of arson, assaults, or sabotage, and occasionally even shootings. Let's talk about some notable left-wing violent extremism incident clusters from 2017 to 2025. First up, protest-linked arsons and attacks on police and government sites during 2020 and 2021. Take the Minneapolis Police 3rd Precinct arson in May 2020, for example. Multiple defendants received federal prison time, ranging from 27 to 48 to 41 months, and were ordered to pay a whopping $12 million in restitution. Then there were the Portland Federal Courthouse and Police Union Office arsons from 2020 to 2021. Federal charges and convictions included a 10-year sentence for throwing improvised explosive devices at police, along with separate arson pleas that came with restitution. To give you some research context, 2020 to 2021 saw an unusual spike in terrorist plots and attacks around demonstrations in U.S. cities, with clashes among opposing extremists. Stop Cop City, Atlanta from 2023 to 2025. On March 5th and 6th, 2023, dozens were arrested after fires and Molotov cocktails at the construction site, with 23 people charged with state domestic terrorism. Those charges have been in flux ever since. By 2025, a Georgia judge moved to dismiss sweeping RICO charges against 61 defendants, though some domestic terrorism and arson counts might still proceed. Many cases remain ongoing and disputed. According to an Atlanta Police Department news release, coordinated violent agitators were involved, but civil liberties groups argue there's been overreach. It's important to read both perspectives. Abortion-related attacks against pro-life targets from 2022 to 2025 have drawn national attention. In Madison, Wisconsin on May 8, 2022, there was a firebombing of an anti-abortion organization's office after the Dobbs draft leak. The perpetrator received a 90-month federal sentence, so that's 7.5 years, plus restitution, in 2024. In Florida, following vandalism threats in 2022, 3 defendants pleaded guilty in June 2024 to a civil rights conspiracy targeting pregnancy resource centers. The Department of Homeland Security and FBI flagged the risk of continued violence around abortion rulings in 2022. On July 4, 2025, there was an anti-ICE attack in Texas at the Prairieland ICE Detention Center in Alvarado. Prosecutors alleged that attackers used fireworks and graffiti to lure officers outside, then opened fire, seriously wounding a police officer. More than 10 defendants have been charged with attempted murder of federal officers. Former Marine reservist Benjamin Hanil Song was arrested after a manhunt. These cases are still pending. Agency and media summaries are available from ICE, the Department of Justice, The Guardian, Marine Corps Times, and various local outlets. In 2017, during a congressional baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia, a shooter targeted Republican lawmakers. Several individuals were injured, including Representative Steve Scalise. Initially, the FBI stated there was no terrorism nexus, but later in 2021 it was reclassified as domestic terrorism. A 2025 House Intelligence report criticized the initial handling of the situation. The shooter, who was a left-wing activist, was deceased at the scene. Let's dive into some data snapshots and trend context. The The CSIS domestic terror dataset categorizes incidents by ideology. Since the mid-2010s, findings show that right-wing incidents dominate, but left-wing incidents do occur. These are often arson or sabotage at protests or infrastructure. The DHS and FBI's 2022 strategic assessment introduced standardized threat buckets, which include anti-government/anarchist, animal, environmental, and abortion-related extremism. This is useful for definitions and examples. According to ADL testimony and briefings, in 2022, all extremist-related murders were by far-right extremists. Meanwhile, left-wing violence that year leaned more toward assaults and arsons, which were rarely lethal. The scope here is the United States. Tools from START and the University of Maryland, such as the GTD through 2020 and topic pages on left-wing terrorism, are helpful for historical baselines. Now, here's a quick list of representative left-wing cases along with their outcomes. The Minneapolis Police 3rd Precinct arson in 2020 resulted in multiple federal prison sentences and $12 million in restitution. The Portland Courthouse and Police Union arsons from 2020 to 2021 led to charges and convictions, including a 10-year sentence for IED attacks on officers. In Madison, Wisconsin, the 2022 firebombing resulted in a 90-month federal sentence by 2024. The Florida Pregnancy Center conspiracy of 2022 saw guilty pleas by 2024. The Atlanta Cop City incident from 2023 to 2025 resulted in dozens of arrests, with charges evolving. RICO was dismissed for 61 individuals, but some domestic terrorism and arson counts continue. The Alvarado, Texas ICE attack in 2025 led to more than 10 individuals being charged with attempted murder of federal officers, with a key suspect arrested and cases pending. The 2017 congressional baseball shooting was later designated as domestic terrorism, with a detailed House Intelligence report in 2025 on the FBI's handling. So how do we read these numbers fairly? Well, it's important to consider frequency versus lethality. In the United States, left-wing incidents tend to involve property damage and assaults, with fatal attacks being rare compared to far-right violence. This isn't a value judgment, it's simply what the datasets reveal. It's also worth noting that charges can shift over time. Protest-era cases often start with serious state charges, like domestic terrorism or RICO, that may get narrowed or dismissed later. Always check the final dispositions as cases mature.